So I think everyone can see what I'm seeing on my screen, which is a map of Chicago highlighting Rogers Park up in the northeast corner of the city. Rome and Susan is started in a storefront in Rogers Park, and we are still in that storefront and do many things in Rogers Park, and are interested in the artists and culture that exist and sort of has developed there over the years. An organization that's been there much longer than us is the Rogers Park Westridge Historical Society. Rome and Susan is sort of located in this little curve of the train by Devon Avenue and Sheridan. And Rogers Park and Westridge is a very large area with many people in it and a lot of different things going on. And the Historical Society used to be located sort of like in the middle on Western Avenue, but it has now moved sort of into this northeast corner near Howard. I first sort of became familiar with them just searching things on the internet because they have a pretty deep and interesting standalone Wikipedia. So it's not connected to larger Wikipedia, but it's just its own historical society wiki. And it has all kinds of great information. And after seeing that a bit, I was really excited when someone from the Historical Society reached out to us and asked if we were interested in collaborating or recording some of the history that happens with our organization as we developed. So I started visiting the Historical Society. They have a storefront that's right beside the Jarvis train stop, and they have different kind of display methods. They have sort of physical artifacts in the space. They have a bunch of books and audio recordings and narratives that are sort of in text form. And they have sort of loose and growing archives. They're in the process of transferring some of these physical archives to the Sulzer Library, which is in Lincoln Square, as they sort of transition to education rather than physical object museum. I think that is sort of the trajectory of the organization. But over years and years, a series of volunteers have digitized a lot of the photographs and materials that were in their archive and that are going to the library now. So they have this tremendous digital collection, which I think is something like 6,000 images, which are indexed by where they are, physical location, when the photograph happened, its size, who donated it, all of those kind of things. So at some point after visiting and sort of seeing the different resources they had, I proposed to the Historical Society that we work together and that they circulate some of these images, which they have digitized. They were sort of all physically located on hard drives in this storefront. And I sort of was interested in if they would be willing to circulate them more widely, sort of like the way knowledge is being circulated on their Wikipedia page on their own website. There's a lot of indexed photos on their Wikipedia, but you couldn't see them anywhere. You had to physically go here to do it. So I proposed that we work together and do an exhibition called Property for the Year of Public Art in Chicago, which was in 2017. And to realize this exhibition, I suggested they put as many images as they were comfortable with into the Creative Commons online and have artists respond to them, either by reusing the materials or as just a launching point to something they were working on themselves. So the Historical Society decided that they were comfortable putting 100 images up when I asked them, you know, sort of like as many as you were comfortable with. So 100 is a good number. They had something like 6,000 photographs. So I looked through them over and over and sort of identified as many different strands of what I was thinking about in relation to property. So you can sort of see here are 10 synonyms for property, and I'm breaking them out into categories. And I looked at these photos over and over and over, and eventually landed on 100 that were shared in the Creative Commons through Flickr. So we sort of dropped all of this extended thoughts on it, and it's just property. And they are listed in chronological order. And we put out a call for art so that people could respond. If I only could have chosen 10 images instead of 100, this would have been one of the 10 I chose, which is from around 1890, and it's in a birch forest. That's where it's located, where Ashland Avenue and Lunt are right now. This image, though, has been sort of like a iconic image used by the Historical Society and widely circulated. So this was the one photograph of 100 where they preferred that we not put it in this project in the Creative Commons. And many of the times they've reproduced it, they have cropped the image. And so they sort of have changed the meaning of the image by making the emphasis on these individuals rather than the forest. And I thought that was particularly interesting and sort of like what I was hoping that artists would do with these photographs that we released. And so the Historical Society had sort of already done that and framed the narrative about who they are and what the organization is about by taking the source material and finding the particular elements in it and amplifying them. So, not being able to use this image, I selected another image that also has the birch forest in it. And this is, on the photograph is written, woods near Perry Street and Greenleaf Avenue, Rogers Park, Chicago, Illinois. Perry Street is what is now Greenview. And this photograph is from, I think it's an undated photograph that was a 5x7. It was from around 1900. So this is the birch forest that I chose instead of this birch forest. And this is an image that Nora then selected to work with in property. So maybe at this point, I will toss it over to you, Nora.
Sure. The photo, the main photo showing the whole forest is so beautiful for a lot of reasons. I think the composition and showing what used to be here before all the Europeans came, or right before all the Europeans came. And when I chose, the one that I did choose shows, as Mavis and Warren can recognize, shows the marks where tribal people, before anyone else lived here, harvested birch bark. And I think the date, maybe it is undated, or 1909 or something. And I thought, that's not that long ago, that here are signs of who used to be here. And for sure, in the photo where the people are all dressed up in front of these trees showing harvested bark by the citizens who lived here, I'm sure they had no idea why the trees looked that way. And where I have a cabin up on Le Coup de Ray Reservation, The road where I live is only 1.5 miles long, and there are 2 birch stands that every spring are show signs where bark is harvested. And so I always photograph those. So when I saw this one, I thought that would be perfect to show what happens every spring, and match it to, yeah, that's up on my road, match it up to the photo from 1909. But the funny story, when I decided on that one and called Nathan, I said something to the effect, well, why do you think those trees in the 1909 photo, why do you think those trees have those dark stripes? And you, Nathan, said, well, I don't know. Do you think maybe there was something like Dutch elm disease for birch trees? And I said, no, that show, those are marks of who lived here before, and that people should think about. No one does, and now they will, because I'll match it with current photos of my reservation. But that was the beginning of property, and another or maybe in conversation too, property. I mean, the word property in the title of your show, your concept, was strange to me, because I was told by elders in conversations, I think mostly about treaties or about the 1887 Dawes Act, how in Ojibwe language, there isn't a word for owning land, for land ownership or property. So that was another reason that your theme caught my attention. But what I have looked up since we talked, because I wanted to make sure I was giving the right information, and in the Bishop Baraga Dictionary of the Ojibwe language, first published in 1853. I checked today, and there is a word for property, but the difference is that it didn't mean owning land. Interestingly, the definition was household and family and environment. So your property was your, where you belonged. It wasn't saying, this is my land. And so I just thought that was kind of an interesting point that I discovered today. So I assume with the Ojibwe, where in the spring families would go to the same maple trees, and that would be their environment, their spring environment. But so I just thought I would bring that up. I thought that was interesting. Now your turn.
Yeah, I was really excited when you called me, when I had not met you before, but you called me and sort of asked me about the image, and I didn't know. And that was basically exactly what I was hoping would happen when they circulated more of these images, that history embedded in the images would come out through different means that artists would undertake and knowledge that other people would have about them. Mm-hmm. When I asked several people then at the Historical Society, them having used these images a lot about this, it was not particularly, they were not on the radar that the marks were for that purpose either. Wow. And it makes such a strong composition in black and white. And so it, of course, has this aesthetic situation, but it also has a very strange, out of placeness, lounging against a tree, your hand in your pocket, you've got a cane, like
Top hats.
top hat, all of it. And so that was this image being serially repeated as sort of like one of the faces of the organization. One of the reasons that property came up as a title is that when I kept thinking about what they were recording, it seemed that much of the history basically was bookmarked to the point where land turned into property. And so I was interested in the many ways that that then defined what became Rogers Park and West Ridge and all of Chicago. So as people responded to different elements of it, we sort of like, we set it up so that we chose the first 100 images, and then however people responded, it was in the exhibition. It sort of like was then this open situation for people to respond. And so the images that are here are your responses to this. And I wonder if you might want to talk a little bit about some of the objects that were in those images.
Yeah, when I'm up north in Wisconsin, I always try to pick up something. And this is a contemporary small basket that is pretty amazing to add beadwork to it. I'm not good at beading, so I just think the texture and color of bark on both sides, the light side and the dark side, is extraordinarily beautiful. So for them to, to add the beadwork, I thought makes it even more special. Yeah. Well, and just more of the same. But I would like to, and what I do is collect birch bark when I'm up there. And even that, what happens on my property when a birch tree falls, then it takes a year, I suppose, for it, the inside to disintegrate. So many of the pieces I have are still completely round that I have yet to do anything with because I'm not sure how to do it. It's, I need to speak to someone up north. And that's just more of the same. And you can see as I said, the outside, the light color is beautiful, but also on the darker brown, people up north make containers and pieces showing the dark brown also. So they do both. And that's just more of the same.
So this was an open call and an open response situation, and we shared it at the Historical Society. And then there were a couple of documents which showed the original images and then the individual responses to all of them. This is the one image of Nora's that was in that section. And then we also had a little pop-up at our storefront, and one of the very few images I happen to have taken there has Nora's photograph primed right there. So all of this happened in 2017 in the spring. And as you can see from this is page 120 of this artist catalog. I think 111 artists participated. So it was a sort of sprawling thing that was contained largely in videos and digital world things. And, the cloud and Flickr and so forth. And sort of after having that experience at the Historical Society, I was more aware of some of the historical sites around the neighborhood. And the next year we started a project at what was the former Rogers Park Women's Club. We started a flag project. Here's a photo from the Historical Society of them laying the cornerstone. which is in 1916. The Women's Club had been in existence for 25 years at that point, and I think they had something like 900 members. And so we started this seasonal flag project that reflected people living in Rogers Park now, looking at the history and their own personal experiences in relation to the history of Rogers Park. This is the first flag we shared, which was made by Olivia Jade Juarez in the summer of 2018. This is a flag by Nancy Lou Rosenheim in the winter. And so as we were thinking about the history of that space, one of the things that came to mind, so that it's at the corner of Estes and Ashland, is that there are immediate physical proximities to some of the things that we had worked on in property. And so if you see this little tree that's at the corner of Greenview and Greenleaf, that is the source image that Nora had chosen for property, and the star is where our flag project was. So in 2019, I reached back out to Nora to sort of see if we might explore some of the narrative properties of this single image in relation to Birchbark and the birch forest that was where this section of Rogers Park is right now. Maybe I will toss it back to you at this point. We call you, ask you if you want to make a flag.
Yeah, and the flag, again, Nathan designed it. So because it's a flag, so you want to be able to, you want to have an image on both sides. And so one side has as the background one of my color photos with the black and white superimposed, and then of course the reverse on the other. But the hope again was that any residents of Rogers Park who are, after we had our flag raising, people would look up and notice and see and make some connection to the old photo from right there, and a new photo showing birch bark having been harvested. But then as you and I talked further, because I just like birch bark, so I photographed a whole lot of pieces of birch bark, and with the concept of getting more information out, I had them printed on canvas, and then the Igor at VIP Photo Labs, who is so smart, and Adeline and Warren know him, he suggested that we print on canvas the images of birch bark and then float on plexiglass text from the, I wanted to print the treaty from 1833, which essentially was giving away, and that's when Chicago became Chicago and natives moved. So I printed those, or had it printed on the plexiglass that floats like 1.5 inches above the printed canvas of birch bark, because historically birch bark has been used not only for canoes and containers, but importantly, it was used to, before native language was written down, it was used to record and pass down ceremonies and sacred songs. So birch bark has been an integral part of Ojibwe or different nations' culture for centuries. So I thought it made sense for something as important as the treaty to look like it had been printed on birch bark. I mean, that's how, in my mind, the whole birch bark thought came together. Does that make sense to you, Nathan?
Makes sense to me, yeah, definitely. So from this flag, which the flag, the older image on it is probably physically about 100 yards away and 100 years in the past from where the flag was all summer. From there, this flag was part of the terrain biennial, where we sent flags sort of all over the city. And Nora's flag was in Indian Boundary Park for the fall of that year. Indian Boundary Park was founded in 1916, which is the centennial of the Treaty of St. Louis in 1816, which drew a boundary in physical proximity to where this park is in Chicago. For a long time, the park had a zoo of various layers of complexity. I think as recently as 10 years ago, we went there when there was still a zoo, but they have changed that since then. And the park is sort of this sprawling, wonderful space with many monuments and stories in it. One of them is this little plaque, which says that a tree was planted in March 1926, honoring American soldiers. And it was planted by the Women's Club, which is where this flag came from. You can't see it in this photo, but the tree that is standing in front of this is clearly not a 90-year-old tree. It's more like a 10-year-old tree. And so it's this like collapsing of history again, where I talked to the person who ran the park, and they said that the tree that was there had passed away, and that they had extreme difficulty dealing with there not being a tree there with this plaque. And so they placed another one in its stead. And so it's just very strange.
Wow.
There are many strange moments in Indian Boundary Park, but I would definitely suggest going there. And so this is the flag flying on their flagpole, which is enormous. Their flagpole is like 35 feet tall or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, and Nora's flag is a lot bigger than the American flag that they have.
Yeah,
Which is pretty awesome.
they noticed that their flag was probably not the right proportion for this flagpole when they graciously hosted ours, and so then they proceeded to get a larger flag when they undid this situation. But Indian Boundary Park is great. The supervisor there, Phil Martini, is a wonderful person. Go there.
Mhm.
And just one other note on the flag, which then is traveling back to the Rogers Park Historical Society, is that Nora has kindly donated an edition of the flag to Rome and Susan, and we have a series of art collections which we have hosted by different households in Chicago. So if you have a flagpole or would like an enormous flag in your house, you can get in touch with us, and we would love it if you would like to host it. So from there, the flag and the work that we were talking about, or that Nora was just explaining, the plexiglass treaties over birch bark, traveled back to the Rogers Park Historical Society. Maybe I will give it back to you from there, if that's all right, Nora, if you want to.
Of course. Well, because I'm still learning about the whole birch bark process, so I had seen on Facebook James DeKulik, I think is how you pronounce his name, an Ojibwe, yeah, who does word of the week or word of the day, and he did Wiigwaas, birch bark, and showed the process of harvesting, which is difficult. I mean, you're removing, as I understand it, removing the bark. So you have to know how deep or not too deep to go before you strip it, because you don't want to hurt the tree, of course. And I thought, God, that would be kind of great if we could use that video. And I've forgotten, it's got to be 15 minutes maybe, or 10 minutes. I don't remember. But called him and said, hey, we're doing this show. Can we use, would you mind, or would you allow us to use your video? And if you remember, he said, use whatever you want. Absolutely. And was happy that we were sharing it. So that became an important part of the exhibition. And Nathan set it up so it was on a video that was just on a loop, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it is a small space, the Historical Society.
Yeah.
And so we did use video to sort of maximize what we could share in the space. The monitor to the left has primarily images of Birchbark and Nora's images of them, and images from the Rogers Park Historical Society archive and the American Indian Center. James's video, which is the word of the day, sort of like talking through uses of Birchbark, was playing on a loop here. And there's a headphone so that you could hear the language. And then this video on the left was a looping video with images from the Historical Society, the American Indian Center, that sort of illustrated a text of land acknowledgement that was provided by the American Indian Center as a template of land acknowledgements. And so this element sort of plays throughout the exhibition just all day, rather than being at the beginning of an event or sort of like a preamble. We thought it should be always present. So these videos are each 10 minutes long, roughly speaking. So they sort of expand the space in that way. And then these are the plexiglass over Birchbark images that Nora was just speaking about.
And really a nice effect, I think. The first four have text from the treaty, and then the last one on the right, the vertical one, I chose because we didn't have room to run all the text from the treaty. So the last one has all the names of the signers, which their traditional names, which I thought was important to see, because no one ever sees Ojibwe and Menominee names. So yeah. And then the photo, I thought also for context, it was important to have a few photos. So I have a photo that shows my great-great-grandfather, Ojawashkogi Jig, which isn't this one, actually. Well, that's his father. Wait, so that's my great-great-great.
Let's go back.
Yeah.
Here we go.
That one. That shows, that's a photo that's titled Chief's 1880 Journey, I think. And there are Ojibwe chiefs who went to Washington in 1880, and I assume to protest the upcoming 1887 Dawes Act. But that's the only photo I have of my great-great-grandfather. Ojawashkogi Jig was his name. And then the photo just to the left of the single man is his father. And I'm not sure of the pronunciation, but, and then I also borrowed a photo of the two men that are in a canoe that are harvesting wild rice. And that's at LCO. I don't know their names, but I do. And there you can see the texture I mean, the text over the texture of the birch bark, I think it was pretty effective. And, oh, and then finally, I have 6 letters that my grandmother's uncle sent her after she was taken by missionaries, and she was taken around 1887. And this letter, which I read often because it's poetically beautiful. Many of you have heard this letter. It's from 1894. Frank Blue Sky didn't speak English. And so he, I assume, had to go from the reservation to the town of Hayward, which is about 10 miles away, and this in 1894. So he went to someone in town and said, a translator, and said what he wanted to say. The translator wrote it down in English, and Frank Blue Sky copied it. Because I have these 6 copies of the 6 handwritten letters that he wrote in pen, of course, and this in the 1890s. This one is extraordinarily beautiful because you can tell English isn't his first language. And I mean, I used to know it by heart, but he is giving news of the family to my grandmother, who had been taken to Indiana. So she was hundreds of miles away. And the letter before, he had said that his brother was sick. So this letter, from 1894, he wrote, "My dear niece, I take the pen and ink to write to you with sad news. Poor Louis, my younger brother, he is dead, 7:30 yesterday evening. Most my tears burst every minute, and I could not write very well, my eyes so leak. And he say before he died, I got pure white wings, I think. God bless me, from your uncle, Frank Blue Sky." And the reason I included this, because I have framed also the copy of the letter, the handwritten letter, and what it shows is splotches. There are 3 splotches on it that were his tears. I mean, that is so moving to me, to have a handwritten letter. I mean, all the effort that went into that for him to send a letter to his niece who had disappeared from the family, and to see his actual, or the remnant, the signs of his actual tears, was stunning for me to find. But so I just stuck that in along with the treaty things, just to get a family connection. Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, so elsewhere in this space, we shared printouts of treaties and other government documents, including a US Department of Agriculture inventory of modern day birch stocks in lands that were ceded by treaty or otherwise. And so these are sort of materials that are both plain, they're in the videos, there's different language bouncing between the videos, the new work that Nora has made overlaying the text into the birchbark itself. The flag is sort of single-sided in this iteration, showing Nora's color image, and that, and there are trees outside too. And that is the little exhibition that we did at the Rogers Park Historical Society in the summer of 2020. And from there, I'll give it back to you if you want.
Of course, because I really loved how the show looked in that tiny historical society. And Doug Stapleton, who is a curator with the Illinois State Museum, saw that show. And well, not only did he see it, but then New City Art reviewed the show in August, Nathan, wasn't it? As one of 5 shows. Yeah, I think one of 5 or 10, I don't remember, shows to see, which was pretty exciting. And that's why the curator, Doug, went to see it. And he then called and said, I think maybe I would like you to be part of this human/nature show, which we'll show you some photo. But this was as you walk in, the museum had some big prints made of some of my photos from up north, of the trees up north.
Maybe we've got the wrong direction here.
And if I can just say what we decided to make it really good, and this was Doug Stapleton's idea. He said, what if we do all the wall labels in English and Ojibwe? And as you'll see, in the space is easily twice the size, isn't it? Or 3 times?
Yeah.
Twice. And it's much bigger. So all the labels have both languages. And Dr. Michael Sullivan up at Le Coudray the museum hired him to translate, to do all the translations. So that was very exciting that people see now English and Ojibwe who normally wouldn't. That's Doug Stapleton in the kind of dark right there, the curator, and then the other artists here that all of us that were in the show. It's a great show, and it's going after Springfield. It closes actually in a few days, and in the spring through the summer, this show, all 6 artists will be at the Lockport location, the Illinois State Museum in Lockport.
At least one of the artists, I think, is here on the talk today.
Barbara?
Barbara.
Good.
Barbara. Congratulations, Barbara. I loved your show.
Yeah.
So it gave you a chance to sort of expand out a lot of the work that was cramped a little bit, or we made it concise, we'll say, in the smaller space, but these are the different iterations and handwritten copies of the letters that you were talking about earlier. And then in this space, audio is playing of a reverse translation of the letters. Is that right?
That's exactly right. I probably 4 years ago, I wanted to know what the letters would sound like in Ojibwe. I mean, and so Michael Sullivan again, I asked him to translate the English back into Ojibwe. And then I recorded him, and he got his PhD in Ojibwe, but he went to all the Ojibwe reservations in Wisconsin and spoke to the elders. So he learned the old dialects. And because these letters were written in the 1890s, he put a lot of thought into how they should sound, into translating them and reading them. And he just came over to my cabin one day and I recorded him. But I have to say, it made me cry when I heard that. And I mean, I don't know him. We are acquaintances. We aren't, I don't know him well enough to be a friend. And of course, I'm just kind of weeping and embarrassed. So apologized after. And I said, well, I don't know why that happened. I'm so sorry. And he said, well, you were hearing your ancestors. And I was. I mean, he was speaking the way my great uncle would have, or two greats, I guess, uncle would have spoken to me. So that little CD recorder has Michael reading the letters. And then you can see them in English and in the handwritten, and then English and Ojibwe. So you get the full range of seeing it and hearing it.
And then there are sort of complementary things where the museum has pulled from their own collection to sort of complement. This item is yours from those earlier photographs. So there's multiple sort of constructed objects with birchbark in the exhibit as well.
Nora, I had a question about the Ojibwe text.
Oh yeah.
Because I was talking to a friend of mine who's a printmaker, and she was wondering if there were any special characters or if there's like an Ojibwe alphabet that exists beyond the English alphabet.
I don't think so, but I don't know. If you're half my life, I didn't know I was Native. So that's one of those questions I'll find out.
Cool.
Terry,
Yeah, it was a curious question because I hadn't thought of it at all. I mean, I remember looking at the text and being impressed by the repetition of the vowels and the, really like having no concept of how I would pronounce it. And then she brought that up. Because actually there's a Hammond Print Museum that she's affiliated with. And apparently she went there and found a bunch of print that had a bunch of accents in it. And she asked them what it was for. And it was a woman who was Ojibwe and had made this type to be able to print things in Ojibwe.
To watch this Zoom.
yeah.
So I don't know. We should have a conversation with her about it and get more information.
Well, and Cindy, wherever you are, was just answering.
Oh, I didn't hear.
Maybe in chat?
In the chat, there is a response that says, yes, there is in Canada.
Oh, interesting. Very cool.
Okay.
On the screen now is sort of an example of the text that was in the exhibition, this is the text that's in the land acknowledgement video, and they sort of have specified that the video is from the first iteration in Rogers Park, and so it's specific to those occupied lands, which are not the same as Springfield, but you can sort of see the example of the text being changed and translated here. And yeah. And there we are.
Yeah, I think the museum did a great job on the show. So we'll all have to go to Lockport when it moves, huh?
So we're gonna transition slightly. I'm going to put in the chat a link to a WTTW article. And maybe Nora, do you want to talk about this a little bit real quick?
Yeah, I didn't see them making this. This is part of Northwestern University, has a really strong Native group, and they invited an elder from Lac Flambeau, who I think is one of a few who really know the traditional way of making a birchbark canoe. And he was an artist in residence, so he was here a while, making this canoe and showing others how to do it. And I forget, I think it was October or November when they launched it, this being the day. And unfortunately, it was windy and so kind of wavy on the lake. So I know they did launch and go out. They couldn't go out far. The canoe is not on display now, but is going to be on display again at Northwestern in the spring, so coming up soon. But there it shows them, well, you can see how wavy it was. But that's got to be the first traditionally made birch bark canoe going out in Lake Michigan in 100 or 200 years. So pretty exciting for Northwestern to do that. And credit to WTTW for showing that. And so everyone should look at or find your link and check it out.
Yeah, I just put that in the chat. I think it's like a 3 or 4 minute video, so you can sort of see some of the hands-on making that goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And we're gonna pivot once more to talk about some of Nora's current and ongoing endeavors, including this photographic project, and I guess just your daily life of engaging with birds.
Well, and rescuing birds, that I didn't realize what a transition that would be.
It is a transition, yeah.
Yeah, I have been for almost 4 years now rescuing injured birds as a volunteer with Chicago Bird Collision Monitors. And just by default, somehow I've become one that I get a lot of the raptors, and by choice, actually. So a lot of the hawks and owls and falcons. And I've rescued one bald eagle, which I drove 100 miles to rescue him. But the vast majority of the birds we rescue survive. And all the birds every rescue is taken to Willowbrook Wildlife Center for all we do is rescue, and then the vets and doctors take care of them out at Willowbrook. Some of the birds don't survive. Either the injury is too severe, like this beautiful Cooper's hawk. Birds and again, a Cooper's hawk. Birds fly into window. Birds don't know what glass is, so thousands of big and little birds die every year from flying into windows. And what I do is I photograph the birds I rescue, but I also photograph the ones that don't survive, because I find them exquisite in their quiet. They're seeing the structure of their feathers and the gracefulness of their, every bit of them. I think they, wait, God, of course I knew I'd cough. Wait, you talk, let me do this.
Yeah, I think these images are pretty breathtaking, and we were really excited when you shared them with us earlier this year. And it's, yeah, I think there's something to sort of the intensity of detail that can't happen except when a bird has passed away. That's really almost frightening in the detail, I would say, because it's sort of, you know, I've never seen a bird that's not in motion that's close. And so this kind of photography does something that can't really function outside of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really amazing way to honor the life of the bird.
Yeah. And I think it's also, you know, for quite a while you had shared with us photos of birds that you had rescued and saved. And those are always very good. And we have some of those coming up in this slideshow because that is a happy moment. But I think there's something, there's a different sort of gravity and celebration in the stillness that comes after. And I think that that's why these photos are extraordinary.
Because that again is Cooper's hawk, but just the flow of the feathers and the intricacies of what makes a bird be able to, wait. Jeez.
Yeah, we'll give you a moment and maybe
Okay.
it sort of is, these images are sort of throat clearing moments, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we'll move on to the bright side of bird rescue, which involves overnighting birds a lot sometimes.
When I rescue a bird late, so the rehab is closed, I have to overnight him. And I just put them, of course, the bird usually is in a carrier that I cover with a towel and keep in that one room. But this guy, this is an American bittern with a huge beak, who was calmer than I expected. I had put him in a box, so I was transferring him. And Adeline, my friend Adeline, who is here, took those pictures. But I overnighted him, took him to the rehab. They treated him, he's released and was good to go. So most of the birds that we get are like this one. This is a kestrel falcon, a male, so he's so colorful. And he had been caught in a storefront. So I got the owner and went in and rescued him. And he was fine. He had just been in the store for a day, so he was hungry. In a little week, they treated him, and then we released him. And I mean, that is just so wonderful to see any injured bird who had been injured to get released back into nature, but especially so when he'd been an overnight guest with me. I mean, that's just pretty neat to wake up in the morning and go downstairs and lift the towel and see a great horned owl or a red-tailed hawk or a kestrel falcon. And this is Cooper's hawk, and that's the director of our group. And yeah, and he had overnighted with me. And so he flew from the carrier up to the fence, and interesting to watch them because, of course, I mean, they have to get their bearings and then boom, and then they just take off. Yeah, so he's way up on that light thing. The other, my other favorite part of this volunteering is reuniting fledgling birds with their parents. Because our organization will get a call, the hotline, someone will call and say, there's a bird here that something's wrong, it's not flying. And so we go, of course, and occasionally it's a fledgling who doesn't know how to work its wings yet, so it's just hopping. And I have had 2 kestrel falcons that I went and rescued. Turns out they were fledglings. They were healthy. So I go back to the house and on my phone play kestrel songs and the first one was maybe 40 minutes. I put him on the ground, and then finally both parents came one after another, and they start calling down, and this little guy is calling, and then boom, I see him take his first flight, because it takes the parents to say, come on now, do it. And I've done that with big red-tailed hawks that I've seen them, that I overnighted actually. And then the vet said, he's fine. And I said, well, what shall I do? Take him back. And so the same thing, playing songs for that time, it was 2 hours it took before the parents came, and he was just balancing on a bush, and then off he went. So it's a pretty wonderful thing to watch. I mean, being in touch that close to nature's creatures.
And with that image, we are at the end of our slideshow. So we'll bounce back into the group view. And if anyone would like to come off of mute, say hello, have a question, by all means, please feel free to jump in right now if you'd like to. We may or may not have a few more questions for Nora, but I would like to let you all go first if you want to.
Can I ask, are you the bird rescue you're doing is in Chicago?
I go everywhere.
Okay.
I think we have more than 100 volunteers, many of whom aren't crazy about driving long distances. Whereas if it's a hawk or an eagle or an owl, I go 60 miles for them. So yeah, and like the bald eagle was in a little town 100 miles away, population 200 something. and he had been hit by a car, so he had a bad wing. And so the hotline said, okay, Nora, you say you'll go anywhere. And this one is 100 miles. And I said, yeah, I'll leave now. And it was one of the biggest things to happen in that little town. And they said, God, you came from Chicago for this bird. But, and he was a little tricky. And it was a juvenile, but big wingspan. It was exciting.
And I was also wondering about when you said you were playing the music of the songs of the kestrel. Is that just like a recording from a lab, or
Yeah, there are a couple, Cornell and Audubon,
Right,
both
right.
have them. And so you just play it off your phone. And eventually it takes time, but it'll work.
Yeah, I wonder what that language is, right?
Yeah. Well, mostly, well, no, they have different calls. They have
Right.
alarm calls and just regular calls. So, and maybe mating calls. But eventually it will get the adult bird, the parent bird's attention, so they will start calling.
Oh, okay.
And calling down to the young one. I mean, that's the deal, is you want to bring the parents back.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I also wanted to say, I saw, at the show at the Illinois State Museum, which is beautiful, but it was so powerful to hear the language spoken, which was, being, was a recording of, was it just playing continuously? Now I don't remember, or just periodically.
That little CD player, because I didn't want it to interfere with other stuff, so there's a cord to start it.
Oh, okay.
And then it will stop. But you're right.
Such a sense of being held by the language. It was beautiful.
Yeah, thanks.
I have one more question, if I can monopolize this.
Yeah, go, Barbara.
Well, and this may be for Nathan and also for Nora, but back to the flag, the idea, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the symbolism of like the flag, like it's such an idea about planting a flag, and is it reclamation, or is it like a prayer flag in the wind, or or is it I don't just the idea, which goes against the entire, as Nora explained, the notion of property or even claiming. But then so I just was curious about the overlay and how you think about it. And
prayer flag, that I don't remember the artist's name, the blue with kind of strips, and that did look like a prayer flag. I hadn't thought about that part. Mine was more for information about, please remember who was here before. But Nathan, what do you think?
I mean, we sort of saw it as an opportunity to bring different stories just out into public space. So the Historical Society had a few things related to the Women's Club, and there were a few things that were sort of like pennants, where it's sort of, there was one flag that someone made that had that shape where it's sort of like this, and it's a diagonal down, and it's not necessarily a horizontal flag, but it was sort of in that, we sort of tried to overlap it with the site it was in, and the seasons. So it was also marking time. So each flag transitioned on the solstice or the equinox. And the artists we invited had some personal history with Rogers Park. And we encouraged them to also interact with the history in any way they chose. So there's sort of like a lot of directions for them to take it if they wanted to.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of possibility within the idea of a flag, in the sense of that maybe that Barbara's bringing up, like it can be a symbol of like nationalism or like identity, or like planting the flag and saying this is mine.
Right.
But I mean, if you really think about it in terms of like its shape and like what it is fundamentally, just sort of like a piece of fabric in the wind, like it's kind of interesting how like to publicly claim that as an artist and decide what you want people to think about. And so I think that it's just kind of an interesting way to be public and to put an idea out there that leads to this really complicated story. And I think, I mean, there's a lot of background and story in all flags, so why not one like that represents the imagination?
And there's some level of interplay too between the space being a women's club and ideas around sort of like crafting and designing representation in a certain way. So we tried to layer it and let people take it where they wanted to from there.
No, I love the idea about, I mean, the what you were saying about changing it on the solstice. It's like using the pole, but taking it into another layer of meaning and how it can be used. And I think it really did that effectively, because it anyway, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for asking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nora, I had a few thoughts on the birchbark, and I'm not sure, maybe I just missed it, and you've probably already explained it, but sort of the just where does it come from, like the harvesting of the bark? And I like some thoughts that I was thinking of was like it's sort of like leaving your mark by, like, when I saw your trees and the distinct pattern once the bark was removed. But then also there's the utilitarian aspect, and then I'm sure there's the tribal aspect. I just like wanted a little more deeper insights in how did it started, and yeah, basically.
Well, Birch, and actually Mavis can speak to this probably better than I can. But birch bark was used, and tribal people discovered it could be used for wigwams and for recording, as I said, ceremonies, and for canoe, for things they needed. But it was done respectfully. It wasn't leaving a mark. It was taking what was needed, with surely an offering first, before and after. Mavis, what can you add to that? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay.
Mavis is my Menominee friend.
Also everyone, Mound and Wiak. There's a lot of
progress.
There's a lot of information that birch bark does, mark history and what it was used for. And that the brown part of the birch bark was used for etching patterns, etching whatever, messages perhaps. So, and today, like you can buy birch bark earrings. So it's a new fad coming out. And I think it's kind of, the Indian market is taking in on that, and you can do quill work with that. So there's a number of things that, you know, that the birch bark does for adornment, for personal uses, and like I say, signs, and it has many things to offer the people. And I feel like in our natural state of being way back in the 1800s or beginning, our people looked at things to what they could utilize, what surrounds them, what, you know, what can we use this for? And there's also that, if you get to watch that video that that Northwestern has about the birch bark canoe maker, he has numerous stories to tell, and he tells some of them stories on that birch bark. And we went up with the Northwestern group to go get birch bark in that area, and it was very interesting and very well, things I didn't know, you know. And I'm pretty old, okay, but I learned things, you know, as I went up there and found out, you know, there's a number of things that take place, you know. For the canoe, we had to get a certain root to make that twine around the edging of the canoe. So there's if you watch that video, you will learn some stuff that perhaps that will, you know, pique your interest. And so in my mind, I know there's also a season they do this birch bark. Each area has, you know, like say we were in, was it Flambeau? And there was a time span that this man had told us that's the time to pick it and harvest it. So it's not an open season where, okay, today I'm going to do this. There's a time to harvest it. So that's what I learned when I was there, and I was unaware of it because the climate or the time change, and throughout the states, everybody's got a different harvesting time. So it was interesting. So if you get a chance, you know, watch that video of this canoe maker, and he explains a few stories about as he's building that canoe. So, and he speaks, you know, his language, and he does a thorough job of, if you got some serious questions about a canoe and birch bark. So that's all I can offer to say.
Thank you.
Well, Annan, yeah.
Thanks.
So I that's, you know, like I said, right now, birch bark earrings are really in, you know, and it's interesting because we're not, you know, we're all into the bling type thing, but you know, there is a bling earrings out there bigger than, you know, than you can ask for. But these birch bark earrings, really, they're lightweight, but they're beautiful, very simple, and that's kind of the adornment part of it. And it you can do quill work with them and do bead work with them. So the choice is up to you, you know, whatever your wish is. So I'm kind of trying to say that, you know, birch bark is really in now. It's like a new fashion. Yeah. I don't have any pear, but I got the birch bark. I just got to find the energy to do that. So it's interesting.
You can teach me. I've got birch bark too, so you can teach me how to make earrings.
It's fun. You get the hang of it, you know.
Yeah.
So there's rewards with it.
Mhm.
The one shorthand thing or one of the shorthand things I learned during the process of working with Nora about this and reading more was just one of the principal elements of many types of birch bark is that it does not expand in water. And so it immediately has many, many uses, including canoes. It's lightweight, it doesn't expand in water, so it doesn't change its shape. And so it's good for shelter, it's good for building containers, it's good for all kinds of stuff. Anything where you'd interact with the weather, birch bark is sound.
The Field Museum has a canoe in storage, of course, and that's real it's well preserved, but it's also very fragile. So if you ever get a chance to go to the Field Museum, and I guess you got to make an appointment now, but because I used to work there. I worked there about 20 years, and I, seen it all, everything in collections. So I remember this big long canoe, and at the time it didn't, dawn on me, this is really historical. How you just, well, many times you see a lot of artifacts and you say, oh yeah, okay, I see that one, okay. But you got to sit and kind of digest, like, what did you just touch or see? Well, we're on a whirlwind the way we are, the way we think. We're always, the next. But at this point, now I realize, now that I'm retired, I realize that canoe, I should have asked. And I think I could still get the information, how old it is and who made it, and, the history of it. So again, I didn't pay attention, and my own fault. But it is a lovely canoe. It's huge. And the connection to use to make everything stick was from the pitch also. There was a pitch that was being used in that northwestern, that he made that pitch to make it connect. And so it was fascinating. I went there one day to just help out, volunteer, and yeah, I kind of paid attention. So it's fascinating how to work with birch bark.
Cindy, you have your virtual hand up. Did you want to say something?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, I think I was trying to turn on my video.
Oh, let's see. I don't know if we can. I don't think we can help you with that, but here we go. Maybe I can ask you to start your video. We'll see if that works.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm friends with both Mavis and Nora, and I've known them for several years. But birch bark is an in thing again. Finally, it came back. So about 3 years ago, I was fortunate to have a elder teach me how to harvest, and I was up in northern upstate New York. So we picked enough. I harvested enough. Of course, I'm saying my prayers when I'm taking the bark off of the tree and bringing it and getting it. So now me and my daughters have begun working with birch bark, and she does make earrings. And another museum you could go to that would have some birch bark items in it is the Mitchell Museum of the American Indian over in Evanston. And they have a small gift shop. So right now, if you did a search, say on Pinterest or Etsy or something, and asked for birch bark items, you'd see some amazing creations with the porcupine quills. And Mavis and I went to a class a couple years ago up in Michigan, and we learned how to etch the birch bark, but it was a winter bark. So we had to learn that there's a difference between the winter bark and the summer bark, and the summer bark being easier to take off the trees. So it's all a unique experience, and being native and knowing that our ancestors all did all of this to live and to build their shelters and their homes or their lodges. Yeah, it is a lot of information, and you just feel your ancestors with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that.
I think, I believe it's Pokagon that usually puts on programs too, which is not too far from here. And they have different sessions making different items, and they even have a, what do you call it? A food, I don't know what it's called, but they show you how to harvest and the birch bark, and then they'll also go into the food like the deer or the buffalo, and so they have those different things. They have different seminars. I believe they have a web page, and so that's not too far where you could, you know, that drive isn't that far, but it's interesting to go to that too.
Can you
They have-
repeat the name of that?
Pokagon. Pokagon is in Michigan, I believe. Yeah,
Yeah.
or Dowagiac area. That's where. But they offer different courses on different things. And they have, I'm pretty sure they have a web page. And they're Potawatomi. Very interesting.
Sharon wants to say something.
Yeah, Sharon, go ahead.
Hi. I was just curious whether birch was used in any medicinal purposes. So I just looked it up, and it's used for joint pain, kidney stones, bladder stones, urinary tract infection, and other conditions. So anyway, apparently it's the bark is used and leaves, and I don't want to read everything else in it, but there was a certain extra sadness about referencing that, you know, the trees that are no longer there, and in Rogers Park, that was a whole pharmaceutical source, and, you know, too bad we didn't learn more about it and perhaps have used it more in a good way, not harvesting them and then charging millions of dollars for one pill or something ridiculous. But anyway, it's another lost legacy, another lost thing.
Here, here. And Cindy was just posting something about Indian health. Darn, did she leave? Cindy? Or maybe it's in the chat that there's.
No, I'm still here. So my name is Cindy Fox Starr, and I work at the American Indian Health Service of Chicago. So I was born and raised in the Chicago area. Now, my position at Indian Health is I'm the outreach director and the cultural coordinator. So we'll be having two upcoming events at Bunker Hill. One will be April 30th, and it's raising awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women. And then another one in September, the last Saturday in September. And they're raising awareness of Native atrocities that have gone on. But we have a website, American Indian Health Service of Chicago. You can do a Google search. So it's American Indian Health that are going to be doing some programming on that. We're going to start a medicinal garden. We just got some grants in. So we've got some big plans coming up at American Indian Health. So we got to start our plants and start our medicines. And we're going to be working a lot with the Cook County Forest Preserve and being able to harvest these things. And that's some of the programs that we want to teach. We went through a transitional period. Now this year, I think we're really going to put the effort out to get these programs out and going.
Great news. Okay. What do you think, Nathan? I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you all for joining us and for all of your input. we feel super grateful to have worked with Nora on these various projects. It was really wonderful speaking about this, and we just got to go to Springfield 10 days ago or something, and we're looking forward to going to Lockport as well when the work travels there. So if you have a chance to go see it in any and all places, yeah, we're big fans, Nora.
Well, thank you. And Lockport isn't so far. I mean, we can do a field trip, right?
Yes, we could. We should.
Yeah.
Totally up for the field trip.
Yeah, because it'll be spring. So that would be good. But thank you for putting this together. This has been a good get together.
Yeah, it's really good to see people when it's so difficult outside in multiple dimensions of difficulty in the world right now. So thank you all for sharing this time with us.
Yeah, sharing knowledge and thank you to Nora and Nathan for sharing your story. It was really interesting about the evolution of the work, and also just to think about Nora's work in relation to this project and the new work that's happening with the bird project, the photography that's happening around the bird project. And really, congratulations, Nora, and thank you for sharing your story with us this evening.
Well, thank you all really for coming, and watch out for birds. And if you see an injured bird, call the hotline, Chicago Bird Collision Monitors hotline. Or if you want to volunteer and save birds, then come out with me.